Welcome, dear listener, to Bedtime's Sleepy Historian, a place where the quiet corners of history are told softly, with warmth and wonder, so you can drift peacefully into sleep. Here, we do not chase battles or noise, but rather the hidden whispers of the past, the superstitions, the forgotten customs, and the curious beliefs that once shaped the way people lived their lives. Tonight, we explore one of the strangest and most haunting of them all, the fear of mirrors after sunset. Why did so many people, across so many centuries, believe that the glass could trap spirits, summon shadows, or even steal the soul? As the story unfolds, we will wander through candlelit chambers, peasant cottages, and noble manors, places where mirrors glimmered like watchful eyes after dark. You'll hear the tales that kept villagers awake at night, the rituals that grew to keep danger at bay, and the gentle poetry of a world where reflection itself was mistrusted. So settle in, let your thoughts grow still, and allow me to guide you through this dreamlike journey. The night is long, the mirrors are waiting, and the past still whispers when the candles are low. The shadow in the glass. There was a time, not so very distant, when mirrors were not trusted after dark. By day, they were curious objects of light, polished bronze in the ancient world, burnished silver in medieval courts, or fragile panes of glass backed with mercury in Renaissance homes. They glittered in the sunlight, flattering and strange, capturing faces with eerie accuracy. But when the sun slipped below the horizon, the mirror's charm faded. Candles threw shadows across its surface, and the reflection no longer looked like oneself. It seemed alive, separate, a twin who breathed with the same breath but might not obey the same rules. In villages scattered across Europe, parents told children not to gaze into a mirror at night. If you did, it was said your reflection might begin to move before you did, or smile when you were solemn, or worse, fail to vanish when you stepped away. Some whispered that mirrors were gates, thin as frost, into a place where shadows lived. Monks recorded warnings in their manuscripts, though always tucked between prayers, as if ashamed to dignify such fears. One text from the 12th century notes, "A glass of quicksilver, held in darkness, doth open the door to phantasms." Whether this meant demons, spirits, or the simple imagination of weary eyes, none could say. Even so, travelers carried cloths to drape over mirrors in tavern rooms, and peasants turned mirrors to face the wall after sunset. The night was already full of dangers, the howl of wolves, the shuffle of thieves, the unseen hand of sickness, and one did not need another doorway for trouble to enter through. And so the habit formed, generation upon generation, cover the mirror, or risk its whisper. Candles and quiet faces. The fear was not always spoken aloud, but it lingered in small gestures. In a modest cottage, a mother might quietly drape a shawl across the polished plate she used as a mirror. In a wealthy manor, a servant would be told to turn tall framed mirrors against the wall before the family retired for the evening. Even in cities where superstition was mocked by the learned, households did the same, as though the custom had burrowed deeper than reason. By candlelight, it was easy to see why. A face in the mirror did not glow with the steady warmth of daylight. It wavered and bent, the nose elongated, the eyes hollow, the mouth dipping into shadows. A single flicker of flame could make the reflection twitch, as though the image were alive, responding not to your movement but to its own. One account from 15th century Prague tells of a merchant's daughter who looked into her mirror past midnight, only to see her reflection frown when she smiled. She screamed, waking her father, who smashed the glass at once and swore never to keep another. Priests often explained such tales as the work of demons, for mirrors, with their metallic backings, were thought to capture more than light. They might hold impressions of the soul itself. Some even whispered that mirrors drank the spirit slowly, one glance at a time, until the reflection grew stronger than the original. And so, after sunset, mirrors belonged to shadows. Families avoided them, not out of dramatic fear, but out of quiet caution, just as one avoids walking alone in the forest at night, or leaving a door unlatched when a storm brews. It was better not to tempt the glass, and better still to let it sleep beneath cloth until dawn returned. The shrouded mirror. The practice of covering mirrors at night became so common that it was woven into the rhythm of daily life. In some places, it was the last task before bed: bank the fire, latch the shutters, and drape the mirror. The cloth was often white linen in the homes of peasants, while nobles preferred embroidered velvet or silk, as though beauty itself might soothe whatever restless thing stirred in the reflection. There was a saying in the Low Countries: "Glass uncovered draws the wandering dead." It was not only the living who were thought to appear in mirrors after sunset, but the souls of those recently passed. To see them was to invite them closer, and once the spirit stepped through the glass, it might never leave. In Russia, folktales told of a bride who forgot to veil her mirror on the night before her wedding. At dawn, she was found sitting rigidly in her chamber, staring into the silver glass. The servants swore that her reflection had not blinked even once. When they pulled her away, the mirror still showed her face, motionless, long after she had turned. The mirror was carried into the woods and buried, while the bride spoke little ever again. It was not only tragedy that filled these tales, but also small warnings. Travelers said that if you caught your reflection in a mirror by candlelight, and it seemed to smile too broadly, you must extinguish the flame at once, for that was a spirit testing the border. Others believed that if you slept with a mirror facing your bed, your soul could wander into it during dreams, never to return. Thus, the shrouded mirror became more than a habit. It was protection, a kind of nightly prayer, a quiet barrier between the fragile human world and the restless mysteries that stirred when the sun was gone. Death and the darkened glass. Nowhere did the fear of mirrors after sunset show itself more strongly than in the rituals surrounding death. When someone passed away, the very first act, before candles were lit, before prayers were whispered, was to cover every mirror in the home. The reason was simple and solemn. It was believed that the departing soul, still wandering in confusion, might stumble into its own reflection and become trapped. Instead of finding the path to the afterlife, the spirit would be caught in the shimmering surface, pacing endlessly behind the glass like a prisoner. In Jewish households across Europe, this practice endured for centuries, woven into the mourning custom of Shiva. Mourners veiled their mirrors not only to protect the soul of the dead, but also to discourage vanity in a time of grief. To look into one's own face while death still lingered in the home was thought to invite misfortune, or worse, to summon the shadow of the departed beside you. Elsewhere, in rural England, villagers told that if a mirror reflected the body of the dead, a second death would soon follow in the household. So strong was this belief that carpenters were instructed to build coffins far from reflective glass, and the task of covering mirrors fell to the youngest children, as though innocence provided extra safety. One haunting folktale from Ireland speaks of a family who forgot a mirror in the upstairs hall after their grandfather died. That night, a niece climbing the stairs glanced at the glass and saw him there, not lying still in his coffin, but standing upright, lips moving as if in warning. The girl fainted, and the mirror was shattered the next morning before the funeral. For many, these customs were not superstition but duty, performed as carefully as the tolling of the church bell. Death unsettled the household, and mirrors were gates too thin to risk leaving open. By sealing them beneath cloth, families believed they sealed the soul's passage, guiding it safely beyond reach of the living. The traveler's glass. If mirrors unsettled people within their own homes, they were regarded with even greater suspicion in places of transience, inns, taverns, and way stations where travelers rested for only a night or two. These were thresholds, places between journeys, where souls were thought to drift more freely than in settled households. Innkeepers in medieval Europe often draped their mirrors before dusk, not merely out of custom but as a quiet form of hospitality. A weary guest would not want to rise in the morning to find his likeness gone, or worse, doubled unnaturally in the glass. In the German countryside, it was said that a mirror left uncovered might catch the shadow of a traveler who died on the road, and that shadow would linger in the room until someone else took the same bed. Some inns kept no mirrors at all. Travelers might instead be given a small bowl of water to wash in, its surface less threatening than polished silver. There are records of Italian warehouses where mirrors were locked in chests until sunrise, for fear that the restless spirits of soldiers, many of whom perished along the roads, would appear in them, seeking company. One tale survives from Bohemia of a merchant who, lodging at an inn, insisted he needed a mirror for shaving before dawn. The innkeeper reluctantly fetched one, warning him to keep it veiled until daylight. The merchant laughed at such superstition. But when he lit his candle and set the mirror upon the table, he saw not his face but the pale countenance of a boy, drenched in rain, staring silently back. The merchant fled the inn before sunrise, leaving his belongings behind. For travelers, mirrors were more than tools. They were thresholds in unfamiliar rooms, reflecting not only the self but the spirits who haunted crossroads and rest stops. Better to pass the night unshaven, they believed, than to risk sharing one's chamber with an uninvited guest from the glass. The scholar's mirror. Not all feared the mirror, some sought its hidden power. Among scholars, mystics, and magicians, the mirror after sunset was not a thing to be shunned, but a door to be approached with reverence, and a steady hand. Medieval manuscripts tell of scrying, the art of gazing into reflective surfaces to glimpse what lay beyond ordinary sight. By day, water in a bowl or polished stone sufficed, but by night, the mirror was considered most potent. In the quiet hour between dusk and midnight, when lamps flickered low, the mirror became less a tool for vanity and more an instrument of vision. John Dee, the famed advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, kept a black mirror of obsidian, imported from the New World. He and his assistant Edward Kelly would stare into it by candlelight, hoping to summon angels or glean messages from the divine. Yet even Dee recorded moments of unease, when the images seen were too sharp, too alive, as though someone stood just behind the surface, waiting. In Italy, Renaissance magicians wrote of the dark hour, when a mirror's reflection ceased to belong wholly to the living. Some swore they had seen lost relatives in the glass, mouths moving soundlessly, as if pressing upon the barrier from the other side. A scholar in Padua claimed his mirror once showed him his own funeral procession, weeks before illness struck him down. Even ordinary folk sometimes borrowed this practice. Young women in Eastern Europe were said to hold mirrors by lamplight on midsummer nights, hoping to see the face of their future husband. Many did, or thought they did, but just as often, the mirrors showed only shadows, or worse, nothing at all, which was taken as a warning of a life alone. Thus, mirrors after sunset occupied a curious place, feared in cottages, hidden in inns, but coveted in studies and secret chambers. They were both threat and promise, danger and revelation, depending on the hand that held the candle before them. The watchful glass. In the villages, mirrors were not thought of as mere objects. They were watchers. Silent, patient, and never blinking, they sat on walls or in chests, waiting for eyes to meet them. After sunset, when firelight danced upon their surface, people whispered that the glass began to watch back. Old folktales gave mirrors their own wills, as though they were half-living beings. A grandmother in Brittany told children that a mirror could grow hungry if left uncovered at night. "It will swallow your face," she would murmur, "and spit back only your shadow." In Poland, some believed a mirror could remember everyone who had ever looked into it, storing their images like pressed flowers. When the night deepened, those stored reflections were free to wander, stepping into the rooms of the living. Farmers, who feared little in their hard lives, often turned mirrors to the wall after sundown. In rural Russia, the custom went further. they would hang a small cloth or kerchief over the glass so it would sleep. To leave it bare was considered cruelty, like forcing a creature to stare endlessly without rest. A tale from the Black Forest speaks of a mirror that blinked. Travelers swore they saw its surface ripple as if stirred by breath, though the room was still. The mirror was passed from family to family, each household suffering misfortune until finally it was buried deep in the woods. Hunters who stumbled upon it years later claimed it was warm to the touch, as though it had been waiting. To these people, mirrors were not tools but presences. You treated them with the same wary respect you gave a guest who had overstayed his welcome, acknowledged, but never fully trusted. And at night, when the boundaries between worlds were thinnest, the mirror's watching felt closer, sharper, as though the eyes behind the glass were only pretending to be your own. Veiled glass and silent rooms. When death entered a home, mirrors were the first to be veiled. Across Europe, Asia, and beyond, it was an instinct as old as mourning itself: cover the glass, or risk letting the spirit of the newly departed be trapped. In Jewish tradition, during Shiva, mirrors were shrouded with cloths or turned to the wall. The reasons were layered: humility before God, avoidance of vanity and grief, and the darker belief that the soul of the dead might linger and mistake the mirror for a doorway. A reflection left uncovered could confuse the spirit, pulling it back into the realm of the living. Similar practices were found in Catholic households. In rural Ireland, when a body lay in wake, every mirror in the cottage was hidden. If the dead seized themselves, one old woman warned, "They'll not rest, and neither will you." For the mourners, the silence of the room was protection, and a mirror's shine was a dangerous crack in that stillness. In China, mirrors were also covered when death occurred. To glimpse a ghost in the glass was considered disastrous, both for the spirit and the living. Some believed the reflection might even snatch the soul of the grieving, chaining them to the departed. Better to hide the mirror's gaze, leaving nothing for shadows to cling to. The ritual extended beyond funerals. In some Eastern Orthodox villages, prayers at night were never held before a mirror. A woman kneeling to whisper her Ave Maria would turn her small hand mirror to the wall, lest her bowed reflection echo her words with a mouth not quite her own. To veil a mirror was to tame it, to close its eye when human eyes were most vulnerable. Even the faint shimmer of lamplight upon glass felt like a crack where something might enter, or slip away. And so, families lived with mirrors as one lives with fire, useful, illuminating, but always edged with danger, never to be trusted in the dark hours of the night. The Inn of Restless Reflections. Travelers told many tales of the mirrors in lonely roadside inns, where the silence of night pressed close against timber walls and the only light came from a weak lantern or the dying glow of the hearth. One story, often retold along the trading routes of Bohemia, spoke of an inn where no guest ever stayed twice. The rooms were simple enough: beds of straw, tables of pine, a jug of ale, but in each chamber hung an old, warped mirror. At sunset the glass appeared harmless, showing nothing but the tired face of the wanderer. But by midnight things changed. Some guests swore they saw themselves moving when they were still. Others claimed that if they dared to meet their reflection's gaze for too long, it blinked, or worse, smiled faintly, though their own lips had not moved. One peddler told of rising from bed for a drink of water and glimpsing his reflection already standing, waiting in the glass, as though it had not lain down with him at all. He fled before dawn, leaving his pack behind. The innkeeper, it is said, made no effort to stop him, perhaps knowing that fear was payment enough. Farther west, in Burgundy, another inn grew infamous for its long hallway lined with looking glasses. Soldiers marching through after a battle were offered shelter there, but most refused to sleep in the mirrored rooms. They claimed that the mirrors multiplied their numbers, filling the corridor with silent duplicates of men who had died only hours before. The innkeeper protested that the glass was fine Venetian work, imported at great cost. But when he himself began to hear the sounds of footsteps behind him with no one near, he finally draped the mirrors in cloth. Such tales blurred truth and invention, yet they carried a common thread: mirrors were never idle at night. They were restless, like windows that wanted opening, tugging at the edges of human certainty. In the flicker of tavern candles, where shadows swelled and firelight quivered, a mirror seemed less like a reflection and more like a stranger trapped in shallow water, waiting for someone foolish enough to look too long. Charms against the glass. Fear of mirrors after sunset did not end in silence alone. People devised small rituals, charms, and wards to keep the night's dangers at bay. For every tale of restless reflections, there was also advice whispered over doorsteps, tucked into grandmother's stories, and written in the margins of prayer books. In Eastern Europe, villagers sprinkled salt across windowsills and along the base of a mirror before sleep. Salt was a barrier, a substance both pure and incorruptible, believed to sting whatever spirit dared cross its line. To place salt at the foot of a mirror was to make it blind, forcing it to shut its eye until morning. In parts of Germany, rosemary and sage were hung from the corners of mirrors, tied in bundles with red thread. If a ghost sought to step through, the herbs would choke it, just as smoke chokes flame. The red string itself had meaning too. It was said to knot the mirror shut, binding its silver surface from within. Some Italian households taught children to whisper a simple incantation before bed. Chiudi l'occhio, non guardarmi, close your eye, do not watch me. The phrase, barely breathed, was meant to lull the mirror into sleep. Parents told their sons and daughters that mirrors, like people, could dream, and a soft word was enough to send them drifting into harmless slumber. In rural China, a red paper charm, inked with the character for peace, was pasted directly on the glass during certain festivals. No spirit, it was said, could crawl through writing blessed by ritual. The paper would flutter gently at night, as though the mirror exhaled against its barrier, but the charm held firm until morning. And in the Scottish Highlands, where tales of second sight and shadow people abounded, some refused mirrors altogether after sunset. They covered them with woolen cloths dyed black, believing that darkness was safest when it was honest. To let a mirror shine in the dark was to tempt it to lie. Each of these acts, sprinkled salt, tied herbs, whispered words, spoke less of superstition and more of survival. To those who lived by the flicker of firelight, with the vast dark pressing against their walls, a mirror was not simply an object. It was a question. And people, in their quiet wisdom, preferred to answer it with protection rather than curiosity. Lovers and families in the mirror's gaze. Not all fears of mirrors after sunset were born from wandering spirits or restless armies. Some came from the simple, fragile intimacies of human life, moments of love, grief, or birth, when the soul was thought to hover too close to the surface of the body, easily caught by the waiting glass. In France, couples whispered that to kiss before a mirror after dusk was to risk inviting another set of lips to join, unseen. The mirror, jealous of love, might hold a reflection of the embrace, and in doing so, steal away the warmth between two people. Young brides were warned by their mothers never to let the marriage bed face a mirror, for fear that their joy might be halved, split into glass and flesh. Some claimed that this was why so many newlyweds hung sheets or veils across their chambers at night, not only to preserve modesty, but to silence the glass. In Russia, there was a tender superstition surrounding childbirth. If a mirror was left uncovered in the room where a woman labored, it was said the child might be born without breath, its soul snatched at the threshold of life. To prevent this, midwives would drape every polished surface with cloth, muttering blessings as they moved. The first thing the child saw should be its mother's face, not a pale double in the silver depths of a mirror. Even grief carried this caution. In many lands, from Ireland to India, mourners covered mirrors after death. not only to keep the ghost from becoming trapped inside, but to protect the living, whose sorrow might make them vulnerable. The bereaved, hollowed by loss, were thought to be easy prey. If they caught their own reflection in those dark hours, it might look back not with sympathy but with hunger, seizing the chance to claim what grief had left undefended. Among lovers, parents, widows, and newborns alike, the fear was the same. Mirrors did not respect human closeness. They watched too eagerly, listened too intently, and held too much. When night fell, when hearts were most open, the glass was not trusted. So cloths were drawn, candles dimmed, and glances carefully averted. People understood that life itself was delicate, and if mirrors had a thirst, it was strongest when souls shone brightest in their most private hours. The mirror in the wilderness. For those who traveled after dark, the fear of mirrors often bled into the wider world. Nature itself seemed to conjure reflections that carried the same unease. A still pool by the roadside, a sheet of ice over a frozen pond, even the gleam of moonlight caught on polished stone, all could resemble a waiting mirror. And to meet one at night was thought to be dangerous. Desert caravans told stories of glass wells that appeared under the stars. A shimmer on the sand would look like water, drawing the thirsty toward it. But when they stooped to drink, they found not a pool but a gleaming sheet, as though the desert had set a mirror flat upon the ground. Some swore that if you looked too long, you would see not your own reflection but the faces of those who had perished on the sands, silent and waiting. The wise men advised walking past without a glance, even if your throat was burning. In the northern forests, hunters spoke of frozen lakes at dusk. By day, they were safe to cross, but once night fell, the ice seemed to shift. A traveler looking down might see his reflection beneath the ice move a heartbeat too late, or not at all. If he continued across, the ice would break, as though the false reflection had reached up and pulled him down. Villagers left offerings at the lake edges, bits of bread or coins, to appease whatever spirits lurked below the frozen mirror. Even in villages by the sea, fishermen muttered of nights when the water grew so calm it looked like polished glass. Standing on the shore, you might see the moon reflected, but never quite true, its edges stretched, its face blurred, as though another moon glared back from beneath the waves. Wives begged their husbands not to fish on such nights. For every boat that set out under a false moon, one was said never to return. Thus, the world itself became a mirror after dark, and people learned to avert their gaze from reflections that seemed too perfect, too silent. Whether desert, forest, or sea, the danger was the same. A reflection was not to be trusted once the sun was gone. Charms against the night glass. For all their fear, people were not helpless before the nocturnal power of mirrors. They developed customs, small gestures of defiance, whispered remedies that softened the edge of dread. One of the oldest protections was the simple covering of the mirror. A dark cloth, a shawl, even a child's blanket draped over the glass was thought to prevent spirits from stepping through. In some homes, every mirror was veiled after sunset as automatically as one would close the shutters. It was not shame or secrecy. It was a kind of nightly housekeeping, like banking the fire or locking the door. Salt was another favorite guardian. A pinch of it cast along the base of a mirror kept wandering souls from crossing its threshold. Salt, after all, had long been believed to purify, to ward off corruption. Women preparing their daughters for marriage often told them, if you must bring a mirror into your new home, sprinkle it with salt on the first night, or it may bring with it more than just your reflection. Herbs, too, found their place in these rituals. In the Balkans, sprigs of rosemary were hung over mirrors so that the air of the plant would confuse any spirit that tried to linger. In parts of Germany, mugwort tied in a bundle was laid on the floor beneath the mirror, its bitter smell driving out unwanted presences. Words, softly spoken, carried their own strength. In Russia, some whispered a short prayer before glancing at their reflection after dark. Not me but my shadow, not shadow but God's hand. In the Scottish Highlands there was an old chant, turn my eyes from your gate, glass of night, close your door till dawn is bright. Such phrases were not shouted but muttered, half to oneself, half to the unseen listener in the silver. Others believed in trickery. A candle placed before a mirror at night was said to blind whatever lived within, for the light multiplied and fractured in ways spirits could not abide. Children were sometimes told to draw a quick cross on the glass with a fingertip before bed, leaving the faintest smudge, just enough to confuse the other side. These charms did not erase the fear, but they gave it form. Fear that can be named and answered, even with simple gestures, becomes bearable. And so night after night people rapped, salted, whispered, and warded, as though each act were a small thread in a greater net cast across the darkness, keeping what lurked in the glass at bay until morning. The morning glass? Few moments sharpened the fear of mirrors like death. When someone passed, the mirror in the room was often the first thing addressed, not the bed, not even the body, but the glass. Across Europe, it was common practice to cover every mirror in a house of mourning. In Jewish tradition, this is still done during Shiva, not out of superstition but to turn the gaze inward, away from vanity, toward grief and prayer. Yet outside of faith, in the whispers of old folk belief, the reason was darker. The mirror could trap the departing soul. It was said that when a person died, their spirit lingered in the air, bewildered, searching for its path. If a mirror stood uncovered, the spirit might mistake it for a doorway and step inside. Once caught, it would remain bound in the glass, restless, staring out forever. Families feared that an untended mirror could keep a loved one from reaching the peace of the next world. Some stories went further. In rural Ireland, mourners spoke of mirrors catching death. A reflection glimpsed in such a mirror, they warned, could mark you as the next to die. Children were told not to peer at their faces after a funeral. The reflection might not belong entirely to them anymore. Even the smallest shards of glass were considered dangerous in a house where death had come. A broken mirror could scatter pieces of the soul, leaving it fractured. To drop or crack a mirror during mourning was a calamity, one that might doom the spirit to wander without wholeness. And yet, there were tales of kindness too. Some believed that covering a mirror was not only to protect the living but also to soothe the dead. The soul, free of temptation, would not be lured into reflection but would find the road beyond more easily. A cloth laid gently over the mirror became an act of love, a guiding veil between worlds. It was not unusual for mourners to whisper to the covered mirror, as though speaking to the one who had gone. "Go in peace," they would murmur, brushing the cloth as if smoothing a restless hand. For in the silence of grief, the mirror stood as both danger and comfort, a potential prison for the soul, and yet also a surface upon which the living might imagine the last faint presence of the beloved. Windows to the dead. There were always those who treated mirrors not as threats, but as bridges. In hushed circles, far from the judgment of priests or elders, people claimed that glass could be coaxed into opening, a window to the realm of the departed. Victorian spiritualists were especially fond of mirrors. During seances, a great black mirror, polished obsidian or simply darkened glass, would be propped up in a parlor. Candles would be placed carefully to keep the faces of the living hidden in shadow while the reflective surface stood luminous, waiting. Participants were told to stare not at their own features but into the void between. With patience, they said, the dead might appear. Even before the Victorians, the practice was whispered of. In ancient Greece, at a place called Astray, necromancers lowered mirrors into water to summon visions of the dead. The surface of water and glass both were thought to blur the line between realms. One looked into the rippling darkness, waiting for a loved one's face to shimmer forth. Folk stories from Russia tell of young widows setting mirrors on window ledges at dusk. They would light a small candle, whisper their husband's name, and wait for his outline to shimmer in the silver depths. Sometimes it was said the dead came gently, a fleeting comfort. Other times, they came too clearly, too insistently, pressing their hands against the inside of the glass as though desperate to be let through. But such rites were rarely safe. Warnings always accompanied them. If you called to the dead, you risked calling others too. A mirror left uncovered after such a vigil might never quite rest again. People swore they saw shapes flit across the surface in the corner of their eye, long after the ritual was done. To speak with ancestors through a mirror was tempting, but the risk was plain. What if the voice that answered wasn't truly the one you sought? What if the face that leaned close to yours was only wearing the memory of someone you loved? Mirrors were doors, the stories insisted, but doors that swung both ways. The living might glimpse the dead, yes, but the dead might also glimpse the living and yearn to return. And once the boundary was touched, there was no guarantee it could be closed again. Shattered faces and splintered souls. Few sounds in the old world were more unsettling than that of a mirror breaking. It was not simply the crash of glass, but the cry of something deeper, like the splitting of a boundary that was meant to remain whole. People froze at the noise, their eyes darting toward the shards, not just for fear of injury, but for the misfortune they believed had just been unleashed. The Romans were among the first to speak of 7 years' bad luck after a mirror's shattering. They tied it to the belief that a human soul renewed itself every 7 years. A broken reflection meant the soul itself had been wounded, fractured into pieces that could not heal until a full cycle had passed. The unlucky years were a period of spiritual recovery, time needed for the broken essence to mend. But in medieval Europe, the dread of broken mirrors went beyond personal misfortune. A fragment of glass was thought to hold a splinter of the self. If scattered carelessly, it could draw ill spirits, who might slip through the broken pieces as easily as through an open door. Superstitions grew around the proper handling of shards. Sweep them up at once, bury them at a crossroads, or toss them into a running stream, where the current would carry away the lingering curse. In Slavic folklore, it was said that if a mirror broke inside a home where a child slept, the child's dreams would fracture too. They would grow restless, prone to wandering at night, their spirit half caught in the glass. Mothers would hurry to burn herbs and cover every remaining mirror, lest the child's soul become divided. Even in the East, the omen lingered. In Japan, mirrors were revered as sacred objects, embodiments of truth. To shatter one was to disrupt harmony itself. Some tales told of houses falling into disarray after a mirror cracked, as though the balance of the family spirit had been broken. And in quiet villages, far from temples and palaces, the lesson was simpler. When a mirror broke, people whispered, something unseen had struck it from the other side. It was never an accident. Something had tried to cross. The fear was not of glass scattered across the floor, but of what might have slipped through in that fleeting moment, when the mirror no longer reflected but gaped open, like a wound in the wall between worlds. Charms for a restless glass. Fear alone was never enough. Human beings, ever practical, found ways to meet their unease with rituals and charms, the small gestures that gave them control over the things they could not fully understand. Mirrors, with their eerie stillness and nighttime dangers, were tamed by custom as much as by fear. One of the simplest protections was salt. In villages across Europe, a pinch of salt was scattered along the window ledge where a mirror hung, or sprinkled across its frame. Salt, thought to purify and ward off spirits, was believed to keep whatever lingered behind the glass from crossing through. In coastal towns, fishermen even rubbed sea salt directly onto a mirror's surface before long voyages, believing it would trap any ill fortune inside the waves of white residue. Another common safeguard was firelight. A candle set before a mirror was said to keep the glass occupied, its attention fixed upon the flame. "Give it something to watch, and it will not watch you," an old Italian saying went. In many homes, a single taper was left to burn before a bedroom mirror until it guttered out, ensuring that no wandering reflection would slip into the sleeper's dreams. In Eastern Europe, red cloth was often draped across mirrors at night. The color red, bright, bold, and alive, was thought to scare away dark spirits that might emerge after sundown. To leave a mirror uncovered was to invite wandering souls, but to leave it swathed in red was to declare to the unseen, "Here is a home protected, not to be touched." Some people went further still, turning to spoken charms. Old mothers whispered phrases as they polished the glass, half blessing, half warning. In Ireland, a common murmur was, "Show me truth, and only truth. Hide the rest until the dawn." In Greece, children were taught to tap a mirror 3 times before bed, a small knock 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 to remind whatever dwelled inside that it was not welcome to come out. And then there were the secret tricks. Tokens slipped along the frame, small coins wedged behind, sprigs of rosemary or lavender tucked into corners. To the outsider they looked like decorations. But to the people who placed them, they were quiet bargains, a little offering to the restless glass, a sign of respect that kept its silence intact. Through these gestures, mirrors became less terrifying, less like watching predators and more like uneasy neighbors. One could live beside them, so long as one remembered the rules. Never stare too long after dark, never leave them uncovered in sorrow, and never, ever forget that the glass was not entirely empty. Tales told by the firelight. It was around the hearth, in the hours when children's eyelids grew heavy and the flames flickered low, that mirrors became more than objects. They became stories. Folklore wrapped itself around the glass like ivy on stone, binding superstition to memory, until no one quite remembered when belief ended and tale began. In the Scottish Highlands, grandmothers told of the glass dub, the dark reflection said to appear only after sunset. It was not your face it showed, but your shadows, with eyes too deep and a mouth that never moved in sync. To see it was an omen. Illness would follow within the month, unless one turned the mirror to face the wall and left it there until the moon waned. In Spain, children were warned of the espejo vacío, the empty mirror. After nightfall, if you dared look too long into your own reflection, the glass would decide you were too attached and steal your image away. Your body would wander, hollow-eyed and soulless, while your reflection stared back, perfectly preserved, from the other side. The tale was often told with a wink, to make the little ones giggle nervously, but it still left them pulling blankets over their heads whenever the moonlight struck a windowpane. In the Middle East, traveling storytellers spoke of the jinn's window, a mirror where spirits could linger, trapped yet listening. Young brides were cautioned never to gaze into mirrors by lamplight on their wedding nights, lest a jealous spirit reach through and tug the veil of happiness away. In some villages, entire families turned their mirrors to face the earth during a wedding, so that no one, human or otherwise, might meddle in the union. In Eastern Europe, there were whispers of midnight mirrors that did not show what was, but what was gone. The dead were said to drift faintly across their surfaces, mothers, brothers, children lost to plague or hunger, appearing for only a heartbeat before vanishing into the silver. This belief spread most during hard times, when grief lingered in every household, and mirrors seemed like cruel things, reminding survivors of all they no longer had. Even the simplest tale carried weight. A Polish mother, rocking her baby to sleep, might murmur a caution not to let children crawl near mirrors before they could speak, for the glass was greedy and might swallow the words before they reached the air. A shepherd in Italy might refuse to keep a mirror in his cottage at all, claiming they confused the sheepdogs, who howled at their own reflections as if they'd seen strangers. These stories were not meant to terrify, not entirely. They were meant to explain, to give shape to the unease that mirrors stirred. And in the glow of the firelight, With the night pressing against the walls, the tales felt real enough. Real enough that children clung tighter to their mothers, real enough that men turned their mirrors face down when storms rattled their roofs. Mirrors were no longer mere glass. They were doorways, watchers, thieves of the soul. And the stories, told again and again, gave the glass a presence that lingered in every home after the last candle went out. The waning of fear. Time, as it always does, softened the edges of superstition. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe was awash in glass. Mirrors grew cheaper, no longer the guarded treasures of kings and noblewomen, but fixtures in taverns, boudoirs, and drawing rooms. To own a mirror was no longer to invite whispers of danger, but to show a touch of refinement. Enlightenment thinkers scoffed at the old tales. Philosophers wrote treatises on optics, on the bending of light, and the human eye's curious love for symmetry. Scientists explained reflections in rational terms, light striking polished surfaces, angles of incidence and reflection, rays obeying laws instead of spirits. The mirror became a tool of knowledge, not fear. With each discovery, the old stories dimmed, as if superstition itself had been turned face down, like a mirror after a death. Yet superstition never quite dies, it lingers, changing shape. In Victorian times, the fear of mirrors shifted into a fascination. Parlors were adorned with them, gaslight glowing in duplicate. But alongside the fashion came a new kind of unease, the mirror as a stage for ghosts. Spiritualist seances often used mirrors, believing them thin places where the departed might slip through. Mediums whispered that if you gazed long enough into a mirror in a darkened room, the faces of the dead would rise behind your own. Even in the modern age, with mirrors in elevators, shop windows, and car doors, a sliver of that ancient dread survives. Few would admit it openly, but many know the feeling, the late-night glance, the sudden shiver when catching one's reflection unexpectedly, the small voice that wonders, what if it moves when I do not? We laugh it off, we tell ourselves it's nonsense, but the unease remains. And perhaps it always will. Mirrors are too close to us, too intimate. They reveal us to ourselves in a way nothing else does. Every wrinkle, every scar, every secret thought that crosses our face is offered back without mercy. In daylight, that honesty is useful. At night, it can feel like intrusion. So the fear waned, yes. But it never vanished. It lingers in funeral customs, in tales told by firelight, in the small unease that makes us cover a mirror when we sleep in an unfamiliar room. Fear has simply traded its heavy cloak of superstition for a lighter, subtler garment, an instinctive shudder when glass and shadow meet. The mirror has become ordinary. Yet somewhere, deep in the human heart, it remains extraordinary. A threshold. A question. A reminder that sometimes, the things that look back at us in silence are the hardest to truly know. The eternal reflection. In the end, the story of Mirrors After Sunset is not only about fear, but about the human soul's restless search for meaning in what it sees. A mirror is, after all, a silent witness, never speaking, never judging, only returning what is offered. And yet, across centuries, people sensed there was something more in that silvered glass. Something beyond the simple bending of light. Something that connected reflection with memory, shadow with spirit, the living with the dead. The villagers who covered their mirrors at dusk, the mourners who draped them in mourning cloth, the lovers who avoided their gaze in candlelight, all carried within them an ancient suspicion that the mirror was more than surface. It was threshold. A door. And doors are rarely trusted in the dark. Now, in our time, we live surrounded by reflections. They line our streets, gleam in our homes, sit quietly in our pockets and palms in the form of cameras and screens. Rarely do we pause to think that these devices are, in their own way, mirrors too, showing us faces, sometimes our own, sometimes those we long for. Perhaps the old fears were not so foolish after all. Perhaps they were simply an older language for describing the same unease we still feel when gazing too long at the self. For there is something uncanny about meeting one's own eyes, not just in the bathroom glass or a shop window, but in the stillness of night, when no one else is near. In that moment, the ancient whispers stir. The heart remembers the warnings of grandmothers. The mind recalls the shrouded mirrors of wakes and the flickering faces seen in candlelit panes. And for an instant, the past lives again. Yet the story does not end in fear. Instead, it ends in wonder. The mirror is not only a vessel of unease, but of beauty, too. It allows us to glimpse ourselves as others see us, to know the fragility of time written across our features, to carry forward the memory of those no longer here. The same surface that frightened peasants at dusk is the one that now lets us cherish the face of a child, or smile at the echo of youth. So, when you next walk past a mirror after sunset, pause for a breath. Look gently, as though peering into an old story. Remember the countless generations who trembled at that same shimmer, who believed spirits lingered in the depths. And whether you smile or shudder, whether you turn away or lean closer, know that you are part of that long chain of watchers, dreamers, and wanderers of the night. The mirror holds more than reflection. It holds history, memory, and the timeless hush of human imagination. And as you drift into sleep, may the glass remain kind, the night remain gentle, and the whispers of fear soften into a lullaby of wonder.